Well, hello, welcome back, hope you're all doing well. Now, for me, we couldn't have a month of Halloween videos without one about a witch. And even though this case is relatively local to me, I'd never actually heard about this woman, which is strange because she's pretty interesting and pretty terrible. So grab a drink and settle in for the true story of Mary Bateman, the very wicked Witch of Yorkshire. Mary Bateman was born Mary Harker in Asenby near Thirsk in North Yorkshire around 1768. Mary was born into a very respectable farming family, and although she seemed to have a fairly normal and happy childhood, she was quite different from other children. She was educated a little and was very intelligent, so she picked things up quickly, but she chose to channel this intelligence in a very different way to most. She used it from a very young age to lie and steal at every opportunity. Mary wasn't especially disciplined by her parents, so as a very small child, if she stole something or told a lie, the adults around her would just laugh and brush it off as a little quirk in their small child who would no doubt grow out of it. But as she grew, Mary just became more fixated on stealing, and the fact that up until now she'd always got away with it meant she felt very confident about taking whatever trinkets she came across in her day-to-day life. And so Mary, at the age of around 12, started working for a family close by in Thirsk as a domestic assistant. And with these new surroundings, there was a lot of temptation to steal, and Mary gave in to that temptation, and she was taking all sorts home with her, and it didn't take long for people to notice. As a result, Mary was sacked from her job, but it didn't just happen once. Mary was sacked from job after job because she kept stealing. This cycle of stealing and then being fired continued for some time, to the point where by age 20 she'd actually made a name for herself in the local area, and it became impossible for her to get a job anywhere. Mary in the end had to leave her hometown just to find employment with someone who hadn't already heard about her. And she finds herself a job in the city of York, but unfortunately that only lasts 12 months because she's again caught stealing and has to leave. And so she moves again, this time to Leeds, a city around 45 miles away from where she grew up, and she finds employment there as a dressmaker. She's not had much experience in dressmaking, so she scrapes by making dresses for working class women only. And Mary really doesn't change with this move. She's still lying and stealing. She starts to tell people she has supernatural powers and can tell their fortunes. And at this time in history, people are very superstitious, and Mary finds herself with quite a few clients. She starts off telling the fortunes of the girls that she makes dresses for a fee of course, and those girls then tell their mistresses about Mary, who then also seek out her services. Mary quickly realises that this side hustle is making her more money than the dressmaking is, and so she starts to develop it even more. She goes from telling fortunes to brewing love potions and creating charms that ward off evil curses. Mary is becoming a very successful and well-rounded witch, offering all sorts of magical services. So now aged 24 and still living in Leeds, Mary meets a man named John Bateman. John is a good and honest man who earns a living as a wheelmaker, and even though they don't seem to have the same moral compass, the pair seem to get along well, and just 3 weeks after meeting, the pair get married. But John quickly realises what he's gotten himself into with Mary because they're forced to move many times due to her theft and lies being discovered and reported. But after all of the lying and stealing, it seems Mary has a change of heart when a local large factory goes up in flames, with some of the workers there sadly perishing in the fire. And Mary does her bit for their poor families by walking the streets asking for donations, and she receives a lot from generous neighbours, which she's then able to give to the families at their time of need. Except she doesn't. Mary pockets all of the collection money, and those families don't see a penny of it. And although Mary is clearly a kleptomaniac and all-round pretty rotten person, it seems that John is willing to tolerate that, for the time being at least, because they end up having 4 children together. So Mary continues telling fortunes and selling potions, and it's very lucrative. In the late 1700s, early 1800s, people still very much believed in witchcraft, especially as medicine was not very advanced at this point, and so people wanted alternative remedies for their ailments, and so her services are very popular. It's at this point that Mary tells customers that she's working on behalf of a Mrs. Moore. Mrs. Moore is the seventh child of the seventh child, and so a woman with very strong supernatural powers, and Mary acts as go-between, passing messages from Mrs. Moore to her customers. Then she also brings another woman into the mix, a Mrs. Blythe, who can tell people's fortunes. This setup is just like Mrs. Moore's. Mrs. Blythe tells these people's fortunes to Mary, and then Mary passes them on to the customer and takes payment on behalf of Mrs. Blythe. However, Mrs. Blythe and Mrs. Moore don't exist. They're a complete figment of Mary's imagination. I think she brings in these characters to make everything seem more legitimate and mysterious. These messages coming from these supernaturally powerful women that no one has ever seen looks far more impressive than it coming straight from Mary, and it makes her less likely to be uncovered as a fraud. And Mary's performances get more theatrical when she goes to the lengths of advertising that she owns the prophet hen of Leeds. Yes, a prophet hen. She claims that a hen of hers keeps laying eggs which read the words "Christ is coming" on them, and she invites people to see this for themselves. Now, of course, this is all Mary's doing. She's etching the words "Christ is coming" onto the eggs using vinegar and then putting the egg back inside the chicken for it to then freshly lay it in front of people. And of course, those who go to see this prophet hen all pay an entry fee to see this spectacle firsthand. Now, I hate hearing of any kind of animal mistreatment, so when I read that she did this, I officially decided she's a wrong'un. My subscribers are mostly American, so I'd better explain what wrong'un is. It's a slang term in Britain. It's short for wrong one, a bad person, a wrong'un. Mary is a wrong'un. And Mary, the wrong'un, does very well. She has many clients asking for spells, potions, and to have their fortunes read, and seeing performances like the prophet hen just makes her more believable and legitimate to them. The locals both respect and fear her as a real-life witch. She knows how to speak and how to perform to make them believe that she has true powers and access to others who have special gifts, such as Mrs. Moore and Mrs. Blythe. But Mary's deeds go on to become much more harmful and dangerous from here on out, as Mary aims to con larger sums out of her unsuspecting clients. She goes on to perform abortions on women, bearing in mind she has absolutely no medical training whatsoever. She barely has an education at all. And then it gets even worse still. In the very early 1800s, Mary comes into contact with a family consisting of a mother and her two daughters who own a draper's shop and also live above the shop itself. I can't find anywhere what these three women's names were other than the fact that they are Quakers whose family name is Kitchen. So Mary meets this Kitchen family and gets close to them. She sometimes helps them out at their shop and often goes upstairs to their home and socialises with them. The women trust Mary and believe that she has access to people with powers and that she can provide potions for whatever ailments they might have. And it's at this point that one of the women becomes very ill, and Mary offers her services to the woman, giving her a potion that will help heal her. And of course, this woman trusts Mary, and for a fee, she receives this healing potion and starts to take it. But it's not long before the other women also fall ill, and Mary offers the same service to them too, for a fee, which they gratefully accept. And within just a couple of weeks, all three women are dead, fed potions full of poison by Mary Bateman. She wipes out an entire family in a matter of weeks. Mary then proceeds to rob the contents of their shop and their home without feeling any guilt whatsoever, I assume. After not seeing the women for a while, the neighbours ask Mary where they are, and she gives them the terrible news that they have died of bubonic plague. The neighbours don't question this answer, and they certainly aren't going to go into the home to check in case the bodies are still contagious. And amazingly, when the local constable and doctor arrive, they also completely believe Mary's story, and they take the women away without examining them. Mary is never investigated for this, and she walks away scot-free from the scene of a triple murder. Now, it's unclear where Mary's husband is at this point. Some reports say that he joined the army to escape Mary for a while, fed up of constantly having to move due to all of the trouble she keeps getting them into. And so, for at least a portion of this time, John Bateman isn't present whilst Mary is committing these terrible deeds. Mary's very clever in the way that she goes about her business. She can sense when people are starting to catch on to her lies, and she always makes sure she moves on before it gets too serious. And given that people are now hearing about this powerful Witch of Yorkshire, there's always a new stranger to dupe, and there's always plenty of clients lining up to see her. Word of Mary and her so-called gifts spread to the niece of a couple named William and Rebecca Perigo in 1806, and this niece knows that William and Rebecca are experiencing some difficulties, and she suggests that they contact Mary to see if she can help, which they do. Rebecca and William believe that Rebecca has been cursed by a neighbour who has cast a spell on her. Rebecca is complaining of a heart flutter and chest pains as a result of this curse. Rebecca also tells Mary that she's haunted by a black dog and other spirits and needs help. The reason she's speaking to Mary is because her own doctor, a medical professional, has told Rebecca and William that they should visit a witch because he can't help her. It seems to me that Rebecca was probably struggling with her mental health, and her doctor couldn't or wouldn't deal with it, so sent her off to seek the assistance of a witch. Mary is asked if she can lift this curse for Rebecca, and of course she agrees to help, for a fee. She tells them about Mrs. Blythe and how she will be the person that she will contact to help the Perigos. And it's not long before Mrs. Blythe has written a note to the couple, which Mary kindly passes on to them. It says that Mary needs to go to the couple's house and sew 4 guinea notes and some gold coins into the corners of Rebecca's bedsheets. The charmed gold coins and guinea notes are enclosed in the letter, so Mary needs to sew them into the sheets, and William is to pay Mary back with the same amount so that everyone's square and Mrs. Blythe gets her money back. And those charmed coins and notes must stay sewn into the fabric for 18 months, at which point William can take them out and keep them. And that's what Mary does. She sews little bags of money into the bed linen, and William pays her that same amount back. And then it's just a question of waiting until the next letter from Mrs. Blythe arrives. And 2 weeks later, another letter from Mrs. Blythe arrives. She requests money from the couple for supplies for potions. She also, for some reason, requires china, silver and a new bed. All for supernatural reasons, of course, all intended to help William and Rebecca. And the couple hand over the money to buy what Mrs. Blythe demands, and they then burn the letters after reading them at Mrs. Blythe's request, so evil spirits can't read its contents. Anyone would think Mrs. Blythe was trying to get the couple to destroy evidence. The couple are handing over a small fortune in the hopes of healing Rebecca. Then comes another letter, which reads, "My dear friends, I am sorry to tell you you will take an illness in the month of May next, either one or both, but I think both, but the works of God must have its course." So what she's saying there is either one or both of the couple are going to fall very ill in May. And this, of course, scares William and Rebecca a lot, but thankfully good old Mary and Mrs. Blythe happen to have some potions which will help them recover from this mystery illness. Mary tells Rebecca and William to eat some puddings, specially prepared by Mrs. Blythe, and these puddings must be eaten consecutively for 6 days. If at any point they feel sickly, they must take a spoonful of some specially prepared honey. Now each pudding comes with a packet of powder which must be added to the pudding, and there is also some very specific instructions too. The puddings must be started on the 11th of May. Rebecca must eat them in full, but William must only eat half. They may not be shared with anyone outside of the two of them, and they must destroy any pudding left over. They also must not call a doctor, else the magic will not work. If they do not follow all of the instructions to the letter, they will die. And the Perigos do as they're told, worried that if they don't follow the letter as it's written, they could set the wheels in motion for something terrible. So after burning the letter, they get to work following its instructions. For the first 5 days, the puddings taste fine and the couple remain well. But on the 6th day, the pudding tastes very strange indeed. The packet of powder for this pudding is much larger than the others, and almost immediately after eating them, the couple become violently sick. Now, of course, this panics them, and then they remember Mrs. Blythe's instructions. If you feel sickly, take some of the honey, and so they do. Will doesn't have much as he can't stomach it, but Rebecca forces a lot of it down, believing that this will heal her. And they remain violently ill for 24 hours. Their lips are black, they have intense headaches, and their eyesight adjusts to where everything appears green. It's at this point that William wants to call a doctor, but Rebecca won't have it. It's said in the letter they must not call a doctor, and so William reluctantly agrees not to call one. Rebecca continues to take the honey, but William stops altogether, and day by day Rebecca deteriorates, whilst William starts to feel stronger. Rebecca refuses to get a doctor or to stop taking the honey, and on May 24th, 1806, Rebecca Perigo passes away. As it happens, William had called a doctor by this point, but the doctor doesn't get there in time, and so William calls him and tells him not to come, as Rebecca has already died, and due to this, her body is not examined. The puddings that Mrs. Blythe had prepared were laced with mercuric chloride, a substance toxic to humans, and the honey she gave them, as an aid to nausea, was laced with arsenic. William tells Mary of his wife's death, and shortly after that he receives a letter from Mrs. Blythe, saying that she told them to eat all of the honey, and Rebecca did not, so as a result she died. William is grief-stricken at the death of his wife, and so in the hopes of feeling better, he continues to receive potions and charms from Mary for another 2 years, and she continues to demand money and clothing and various other items from him the entire time. It's only when 2 years have passed that William remembers the bags of coins and notes that were sewn into the bedsheets 2 years ago, and he realises that after all this time, he may as well take them out. And so William goes to the bedroom, and when he pulls the corners open, he finds the small bags. He opens them, and inside is just lead, paper, and old fake coins. They're full of worthless rubbish, and William realises after all this time that he's been conned. Worse still, he comes to realise that he and his wife have poisoned themselves at the hands of Mary Bateman. And not only that, but they've then destroyed the evidence on her behalf by burning the letters and disposing of the puddings. So a furious William pays a visit to Mary, and he says, "I'm sorry to think that you should use me in this manner." And Mary replies, "How?" And William says, "I've opened the bags and there's nothing in them but bits of lead, plain paper, bad halfpennies and bad farthings." Mary doesn't seem surprised at all by this, and she says, "Well, you've opened them too soon." To which William replies, "I think it's too late." William then says he's coming back tomorrow with some men to get things settled. I'm not sure precisely what that means. Mary begs him not to and asks that they meet in public alone, and William agrees. But this time, for the first time, William is thinking very clearly, and when he goes to meet Mary, he has an accomplice who is in hiding and watching what happens. Mary meets William with a potion for him. She tries to sell it to William, but he refuses, and it's at this point that William's accomplice steps into view. His accomplice is Police Constable Driffield. Mary tries to say that it's William who's trying to sell her the potion, but Driffield sees straight through her. He's heard of Mary's reputation long before this, so he's not about to be drawn into her lies. And on the 21st of October 1808, Mary is arrested for fraud. And if you're wondering what was in the potion, well, that was a mixture of oatmeal and arsenic. Clearly Mary, disappointed that she hadn't succeeded the first time in dispatching William, planned to make it second time lucky. Whilst in custody, there's a search of Mary's house, and they find all of the personal belongings that Rebecca and William had sent to Mrs. Blythe. They also find arsenic and mercuric chloride. I don't know if I'm pronouncing mercuric chloride properly. Mercuric chloride? Don't know. Whilst Mary is originally arrested for fraud, she also has charges of the willful murder of Rebecca Perigo brought against her, and she's sent to York Castle for her trial in March 1809. The trial is big news. A local witch is being tried for murder, and though locals gather to keep tabs of what's going on, they also keep a good distance, concerned that the witch might put a hex on them from where she sits. And of course, Mary denies everything. She only speaks to confirm her not guilty plea. The local newspaper reports that Mary looks very respectable, that she doesn't look the type to poison people, even though she has, quote, a tongue in her head that would wheedle the devil. Mary also tries to blame Mrs. Blythe, but it's very clear that no one is believing that story anymore. Mrs. Blythe simply doesn't exist. Not to mention the fact that Mary's handwriting perfectly matches Mrs. Blythe's, so it's pretty obvious that these two people are one and the same, Mary Bateman. And due to the publicity of the case, of course, everyone who Mary has ever conned comes out of the woodwork and tells the court what she's been up to. She's been committing fraud, extortion and abortions. And of course, when the neighbours of the three kitchen women hear about this, they come to realise that the bubonic plague probably wasn't the reason the women passed away. That being said, Mary is never arrested or tried for the killings of the three kitchen women. A lot of strong evidence is laid out by the prosecution, showing that Mary quite clearly caused Rebecca's death, and the jury return very quickly with a guilty verdict. After the verdict, the judge says that there's no doubt that Mary is guilty of these crimes, and says to Mary, for crimes like yours, in this world, the gates of mercy are closed. And with that, he sentences her to hang. Mary bursts into tears at this news and tells the court that she cannot be hanged, and pleads her belly, meaning that she's pregnant. The law at this time is that if you're pregnant beyond 4 months, then you cannot be hanged until you've given birth, and likely Mary knew this, hence the plea. It's at this point that the women try to leave court, knowing what's coming next, and the judge orders that the doors be locked so no more women can escape. The reason being is that 12 of those women will now need to examine Mary to determine if she's pregnant or not. They reluctantly do so and determine that this is just another one of Mary's lies. It turns out she's not pregnant from what they can gather, and so the date for the hanging is set. It's worth noting here that by this point Mary's husband has returned from the army and is arrested and tried as an accomplice to Mary's crimes. But whilst he certainly benefited financially from her crimes, in the end he's found to be innocent and acquitted of all charges. Now knowing that her fate lies with the hangman's noose, Mary remains true to her character right up until the end. Even whilst awaiting her hanging, she tells fellow prisoners that she can use her powers to get them pardoned, or she can tell their fortunes, for a fee of course, which they willingly pay. To be fair, I think I myself, without any supernatural powers at all, could probably tell the fortunes of a bunch of people on death row. Mary never admits to the murder, although she does admit that she brought great shame to her family with all of her fraudulent activities. And on March 20th, 1809, at York Castle, Mary, aged around 41, is led to the gallows. 5,000 people turn up to witness the hanging of the Yorkshire witch, expecting that due to her supernatural powers she'll be saved at the last minute. But of course she isn't, and she passes away at the hands of hangman William Curry. But that isn't the last of Mary, because her death sentence has a second part to it. After the hanging, the judge orders that Mary's body be given to Leeds General Hospital for dissection. It's said that the reason for this is, in those days it was thought that if you buried a body intact, that gave that body the grace to ascend to heaven. If you dissect it, however, it means it cannot ascend to heaven, and that's what they wanted for Mary. And so her body was given over to the hospital for dissection and educational purposes. The body is taken to Leeds General, where up to 2,500 people pay admission to view her, and apparently that admission money went to charity, so at least Mary did something good in the end. But that's not all. Thousands of people then also attend her dissection, and afterwards, many of them, as a souvenir, purchase a dried and preserved patch of her skin, believing it to be a lucky charm to ward off evil spirits. Her skin was apparently even used to bind several books, and at least one of those books ended up being owned by King George IV. But Mary's journey still didn't stop there. For a while her skeleton was used for anatomy classes by the hospital, and then it was moved to Leeds University, where it was put on display at the medical school. Later it was loaned out to the Thackeray Medical Museum, where it received a lot of interest from visitors wanting to see the skeleton of the Yorkshire witch. It has been said over the years that the spirit of Mary Bateman still haunts Thackeray Medical Museum to this day. I believe now she's back at Leeds University, at least that's the last update I've seen as to where she is. Some of her skin apparently also survived in the form of a folding cup. Her tongue was also kept pickled, but apparently that was destroyed in the 1950s as it was deemed too macabre. A cup made from her skin, no problem, but we apparently draw the line at a pickled tongue. And that is the story of Mary Bateman, the Witch of Yorkshire. Now, it's easy to say that William and Rebecca were stupid to believe Mary, but they desperately wanted to cure Rebecca, and Mary seemed like their only choice after their doctors had turned their backs on them. It was their terrible luck that they just happened upon someone as evil as Mary Bateman. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this case. I've loved doing these Halloween videos, and you seem to have really enjoyed them too, so I think I'll have to make them a yearly tradition from now on. Of course, if you've got any video suggestions that you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below. I only want to provide content that you want to see, so if there's any cases that you've been really wanting to find out more about, let me know and I'll certainly do my best to cover them. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you are enjoying my content. Liking, commenting and subscribing all get my channel pushed out there so more people can find me. And I really appreciate those of you who do comment and like every single video I put out. It really helps me out, and it's so nice to see the same names pop up every single time, and we always have a little chat, and I really like and appreciate that. Thank you for watching, have a great day, stay safe, and for the final time this October 2020, happy Halloween. Bye bye.